Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Okay, allow me to start my timer in a few seconds. Okay, so my speech begins in 3, 2, 1, go. Outcast art often glorifies alienation and suffering, portraying these as inherent to the identity of marginalized individuals. While it may offer things like expression, we think it fails to provide meaningful solutions or pathways to reintegration. We oppose the existence of outcast art on every level of society. Firstly, we need to understand two key things. What does the sort of like role of art look like within society? But then secondly, what worlds do both sides support and what are the burdens on both sides? Firstly, what the role of art is within society. Two things. Notice that art is in most cases a narrative shaper. That is to say, it is not just a reflection of society, it actively constructs and reinforces cultural narratives that exist within that society. This looks like individuals or audiences internalizing the narratives that are inherently portrayed within various arts, and those sort of like narratives gaining that level of acceptance. But also, two, we think art in and of itself has the ability to reinforce emotion. That is to say, it intensifies and validates various kinds of emotions. This looks like normalizing the mentality of the existence of particular things. That is to say, if within the portrayal of a particular art, we think eating is something that is good, that is what society is going to believe in within most cases. Why is this important? Both sides have to prove to you why the existence of outcast art is something that is bad to one, the stakeholders, but also two, in terms of solvency. I'm going to show you why we oppose it on all levels. Secondly, we need to understand what outcast art looks like within most cases. Three things. It looks like the romanticization of isolation and pain. This looks like glorifying things like despair, portraying loneliness as inescapable, right? Because in most cases, the justification for this is, oh, we just have to portray ourselves as lonely, as incapable, just because you want to gain a certain level of empathy. I'm going to show you why that is bad. Secondly, it looks like a depiction of society as hostile and oppressive, i.e., it involves things like graffiti art that is inherently rebellion against things like societal norms within most cases. I'm going to show you why that is a problem. But also, three, it looks like portrayal of loss of hope. That is to say, things like tragic endings within songs, things like perpetual suffering, right? Because the extent to which you probably want to get a level of empathy, you're most likely to necessarily portray things like tragic endings, perpetual suffering. I'm going to show you why that is bad. Notice, this is an opposes motion. We think we can't leave the existence of these marginalized communities in a vacuum. What is the world we are willing to defend within proposition? We are willing to defend a world that has rehabilitative art. What does this art look like? Four things, right? Emotional processing. That is to say, films and literature that depict struggles of various characters and how they resolve them. Notice on clarity, the difference between rehabilitative art and outcast art is that within outcast art, you just portray suffering of particular individuals, right? But within rehabilitative art, you're able to portray how individuals can go about those particular problems and solve them within most cases. But also, two, it looks like agency, right? Art that acknowledges things like hardship and conveys hope to its consumer.
Point.
But also, three, it looks like social connection and reintegration. I'm going to take you after setup. That is to say, marginalized communities highlight their stories and how they can necessarily be able to overcome the adversities they necessarily face within most cases. I think the direct stakeholder within this debate are the marginalized communities, and we are supposed to show you why the marginalized communities in most cases are affected in a negative way with the existence of outcast art. Firstly, you need to understand what the people that marginalize these individuals look like. They continuously want to see you suffering. That is to say, they just don't want you to get a way out of that suffering. For example, if at all we live in a patriarchal society, we just want women to remain inferior within most cases. But also, two, they are entertained by your suffering. That is to say, even to the extent that they buy into that outcast art, they don't buy into it with the incentive of doing something about it, but they buy into it because they enjoy seeing that suffering. They enjoy the perpetuation of all those harms because they marginalize you.
Point.
Within most cases. I'll take you. Yeah.
Dostoevsky was a writer famous for creating outcast art. Do you really think that he was entertained by Russian people suffering?
See, I think for art to have a positive role within society, it entirely depends on the audiences that consume this art. To the extent that I proved to you how people that live within these marginalized communities, A, want to continue seeing you suffering, but also two, they want to see that level of like hardship with you having no way out. We think even if to the extent that this art has buy-in, we think there is no incentive to create solvency within most cases. The third thing on setup is what the society structures look like within most cases. Notice that modern society operates on a foundation of social cohesion, things like shared narratives and various structures that aim to integrate individuals into functioning collectively. In relation to art, there are three key things here. A, collective identity and norms. That is to say, everyone has a sense of belonging. Impact on outcast art, we just create that sort of like exclusion that a particular group of individuals is excluded within most cases. But also with the comparative within rehabilitative art, those individuals are portrayed as excluded, but we are able to provide solutions or to portray ways of how they can be able to get out of that exclusion. Secondly, on social mobility, right? It looks like the ability to reintegrate those who feel alienated, comparative, on outcast art. It looks like just you portraying those individuals as vulnerable and providing no mechanism whatsoever of how they can go out of those particular things. Comparative, on rehabilitative art, it looks like portraying the mechanisms on which these marginalized individuals can use to get out of that marginalization within most cases. But so three, on public perception, it looks like the way we are able to perceive each other comparatively on outcast art, it looks like you're reinforcing the whole narrative of, oh my God, a particular group of individuals is inferior, they should suffer, and it is fine for them to suffer. On rehabilitative art, it portrays individuals that suffer and how they can be reintegrated within society, how they can coexist within most cases. Driving me to my first argument on why we oppose outcast art, because it does not provide solvency for problems that marginalized communities face. I'm going to prove three things here. A, on societal integration. Two, on legitimizing and reaffirming harmful stereotypes. But also three, on commercializing pain without offering solutions. The premise of this argument is that art in and of itself has the power to shape attitudes. The claim here is that outcast art does not create solvency. Three reasons as to why this claim is true. A, you just glorify victimhood instead of empowering action. That is to say, we just portray you as a person that is hopeless, that is continuously suffering, and you have no way out. The comparative within outside of the house is that we portray you as a person that is suffering, but as a person that inherently finds a solution to that suffering within most cases. Second reason as to why this claim is true is that, notice, outcast art in of itself from society as oppressive rather than changeable. That is to say, the actors within that society would always want to oppress you. That's what outcast art says. They will not have no incentive to change whatsoever. Comparatively on rehabilitative art, it looks like framing society as changeable, framing society as inclusive, being able to integrate individuals that have been marginalized within that society. Also, three, it lacks constructive narratives that offer improvement. The narratives that drive within my last 15 seconds, that drive within outcast art, look like we are suffering, look like, oh my God, we are going through this sort of like pain, and it is something that is normal within most cases. There are two key impacts: is that A, you perpetuate marginalization, but also two, you inhibit systemic change. That is to say, individuals do not have the ability to reintegrate within society. There are two key impacts that are achieved within outside the house. Is that A, you create an uplifting narratives for this individual, but also two, you create that level of social sort of like progress, because individuals believe they can be integrated into a system that marginalizes them within most cases. I beg to rest.
Thank first prop calling for stop. First opposition.
Hello, can I go? Am I audible?
Yep, you're audible. Ready whenever you are.
Okay. Firstly, I would like to announce you that I prefer verbal POIs and that I will be engaging in topics like self-harm, murder, or uh, sensitive topics in general. Now, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. As Nietzsche put it, the real question is, how much truth can you stand, really? In my speech, I'll have 3 points of framing, 4 points of rebuttal, and 2 constructive parts, one on how it is better for the consumer and one on how it is better for the artist, whereas my colleague on the second speaker will tell you how it is better for society as a whole. Now, going into rebuttal. Firstly, on the construction of negative narratives, and we're telling you that these narratives are created by the society that rejects those people, that constantly puts these people through the mainstream ideas into isolation. Art gives them a sense of community to unite themselves. Moreover, on the point that this art validates negative emotions, and we're telling you that even if that's true, it is good. It is good to validate the feeling of being sad. It is good to validate the feeling of being rageful or angry. That is not a problem. The problem with these emotions is how you express them. And we are going to prove to you throughout my speech and the debate that our side expresses these emotions better. Okay, now on artists wanting you to suffer and enjoying and being some kind of sadist is incredibly misleading and not mechanized. And we're telling you that they are sparing the motion because the only thing, the reason this art exists is because they want to express themselves. They are not psychopaths. And if they were psychopaths, they would have killed people, not write a book or a song on a certain topic. Now on rehabilitating art and their alternative, we're telling you that one, it is not mutually exclusive. We can also have rehabilitating art, and second of all, it is simply not enough, because the reason people find this kind of art comforting is because it speaks to them more than how, I don't know, words or classic psychologists would speak to them. It is something more meaningful that targets their specific feelings. Moreover, it is okay. Now let's get into framing, and we're telling you that we have lots of individuals who feel lost, who feel misunderstood and alone. People who have lots of self-harm thoughts, who feel like no one truly cares about them, like loves them, thinks about them, and the way society is structured and functions is just not built with them in mind. We're telling you this is specifically bad when it comes to minorities. Constantly punished and pushed aside by society, punished for being born a certain way, systemically disadvantaged every day they get out of the house. We're talking about racial minorities, about mentally ill people with depression, anxiety, and so on. We're telling you that 40 years ago, we used to remove parts of the brain, of the brains of the people we deemed as mentally unstable. A bit before, we used to euthanize them. Now, what we prove with this is that we are talking about social outcasts, people that do not fit into the mainstream narrative, and they deserve to have art, as art needs to be for everyone, as it is a fundamental human experience. Just as everyone experiences joy, pain, love, and loss, people need diverse forms of art that speak to their personal experience. And that's why outcast art exists in the first place, because it speaks to those who feel alienated, in the way mainstream art does not speak. For example, when we're talking about LGBTQ themes and, I don't know, working class struggles or mental health problems, we're telling you that throughout history, the art that expresses this was absent until people that had those specific emotions started integrating it into the way art works. We're telling you that these people who already have those emotions, are the people that create this art. What we understand from this is that outcast art helps individuals feel understood and feel better, in essence, and that is my constructive point, and let's get into it. Not all art should or is be beautiful, flower power. It reflects our emotions and struggles, and it's sometimes meant to challenge, to unsettle, and to give a voice to those who are unheard and to comfort those who are unseen. 2 points here, first on the consumer and second on the artist. And we're saying to you that on the consumer, again, we have lots of people who do not identify with what mainstream art has: joy, pride, and so on. We're telling you that mainstream society made them feel ashamed and feel marginalized in the first place. Therefore, when you see that there are people, artists, that feel like you, speak your language, all of a sudden you are no longer alone. Someone feels like you and targets your specific feelings. You are understood because because it is simply a larger number of people that identify with you. And this is comforted because you know that others have the same problem, the artists and the other consumers with which you can connect, because you, I don't know, talk about the same music, you get into a discussion about this, you can connect with them and you can share the same experiences that you have. And that is a very important aspect of human nature, because you get things off your chest and you find your own people that feel like you and can understand you, meaning that it is less likely for you to, I don't know, listen to what the protagonist, if it is about, I don't know, really negative and explicit expressions of rage, like violence and stuff, you are less likely to actually engage in those practices, because it comforts you. No, thank you, you can share, and there is no more rage because you are comforted. You understand the value of communication and acceptance. You are not alone, and you know you have your community to which you can simply talk to, vent, and they will understand you. Second point on this, we are empathetic beings, meaning that if we see an expression of violence to rage, you see suffering and you relate to that suffering because you are a person that suffers every day. And because you are an outcast and understand suffering, you are less likely to want to provoke suffering because you know how it feels. Now, why are these impacts unique? Firstly, because on their side, everything is an expression of things you hate as an outcast, of the mainstream narrative that pushed you into becoming an outcast in the first place, and the mainstream narrative that are not built for you to even exist and with you in mind. Meaning that on our side, no thank you, 1 second, you can let it out, and the negative actions no longer build up in your soul and bust. I can take a POI.
Okay, speaker, you have to show to us where it's most likely for you to go and look for those communities rather than perpetuating a notion of victimhood within these individuals.
We're telling you that in the first place, you need to prove that it is likely to be isolated on our side, because you did not. Because on our side, when you let out these feelings, even by listening to music and being comforted, because you know that some people are also, I don't know, suffering the same things like the artists, you are automatically better off. Second point, it is likely to simply have a conversation with anyone about music and get to this art, to a specific artist. That person might know it, and therefore you can share the common experiences. Okay. Moreover, you can let things out. You can simply cry because of that music. You can talk it out. It inspires you. And now let's get into the artist. Well, it benefits the artist as well, because society defines what is normal and rewards those who fit, while those who can't are left out. And we're telling you that in our world, they can express themselves. Again, they can put out those negative emotions on a song or on a screen. And it's simply like venting for the artist. It's just like communicating and putting your problems out. And if they express those negative emotions to art, they also feel heard and understood by the consumers. And therefore, this is unlikely to commit the acts that are depicted. Therefore, the reason they commit, meaning that the reason they commit the acts of violence, and the reason the reason they create these violent expressions or whatever, it's because they are not heard and understood. Therefore, if they no longer need to physically create those problems. We're telling you that they continue to produce, and everyone wins. More art for everyone. We're giving a choice for everyone to enjoy whatever art they like. Thank you.
Thank first prop, inviting second prop.
Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm just going to give a little bit of clarity before I go into my substantive arguments. Firstly, one of the things that we get from team opposition is this whole idea that, hey, that they are creating harmful incentives, that that's not necessarily what's happening, that these people never had any reason to create harmful incentives towards marginalized groups of people. Firstly, I feel like that stems from a huge misconception of what comes from our first speaker. We tell them that at a point in time in which we're not saying that they create harmful incentives, but they reinforce them in status quo. Why? The analysis he gives on this particular piece of argumentation is the optics that revolve around this certain sort of art. Notice, this art is most likely to be bought in by people who are extremely conservative. At a point in time which they need something to push them towards solvency, they need to visibly see that, hey, maybe this is the mechanism we should employ such that we bring about solvency of the problems happening in status quo. They just show us that suffering is bad. And so what if it's bad? They don't give us any analysis on why they bring about some sort of solvency to these problems in status quo. We don't feel like they can win on that certain clash, right? Secondly, on the whole idea of expression, because this is something that their first speaker spends a lot of time giving us buzzwords on why expression is particularly important or why it's the most important thing to be talking about in this debate. Firstly, I feel like this is a highly symmetrical idea. They don't understand the counterfactual that comes from our side of the house. We tell them rehabilitative art is still existent in status quo, and that's a much viable method of attaining solvency of problems like marginalization. We don't get any sort of analysis as to why expression can still be done in rehabilitative art. At a point in time, which they spend a lot of time telling us, hey, that expression is important because of ABCD. Those impacts can still be achieved on our world simply because of the fact that we give them a chance to express themselves, right? Our side becomes comparatively better because we actually show viable methods of solvency. I feel like they don't understand anything that comes from fast speech. Okay, I'm just going to show you why. One, there's a huge sort of complacency when it comes to this art. The thesis of this claim is based off the characterization that Fahad gives in his speech. Notice the characterization he gives you on Outcast Art is that the optics that revolve around it are just that, hey, suffering is bad, and then this sort of marginalization is bad. There's no real emphasis as to why we should bring about solvency or as to why the methods that are supposed to be attained to solve the problem in status quo. We don't get any sort of analysis on that. Secondly, it creates some sort of victimhood in these specific marginalized groups of people because they get some sort of comfortability that, okay, that my situation is being faced by a lot of people and that I should just sit down without actually trying to attain solvency of this problem. Thirdly, at a point in time which they just shift the optics towards this art to being some sort of victimhood or some sort of comfortability in what you're facing, we feel like for marginalized groups of people, that's particularly bad. Secondly, we feel like if you're buying in for the conservative people, there are much more likely optics that are going to evolve around this art is the commercialization of it. That, hey, maybe that it's that this pen should have been going through movies, that this music is very expensive, that this music is very good at the end of the day. They just commercialize the art with no reason as to why we should attain solvency at the end of the day. Why is this particularly bad? We feel like, one, there's a normalization of marginalization. The justification for this is that rather than emphasizing why we should bring about solvency, the measures we should actually attain for mitigation, they choose to emphasize that these people are suffering. They choose to emphasize the bad things that are happening on these people. They escalate some sort of acceptance or comfortability in these certain scenarios. We feel like that's particularly bad when it comes to solvency of this problem. Secondly, we feel like at a point in time in which this attention is much more likely to be directed into things like, a commercialization or a sense of victimhood within these people. We feel like that's particularly bad because they never actually attain solvency. We never get any sort of viable methods of mitigation for the problems being faced in status quo. The comparative becomes very simple in this debate. Rehabilitative art becomes simply better because we actually push methods of solvency at the end of the day. We make these conservative people view it's bad and how we should attain solvency at the end of the day. Why is this particularly better? Because we care more for the vulnerable people in this debate, because we actually say that victimhood is bad, that you shouldn't find comfortability in this, but you should actually thrive to go and attain solvency of the problem in status quo. Secondly, it incentivizes you to abandon this victim mentality that, hey, I should find comfortability in what's happening to me rather than actually fighting for solvency. Before I go into my second substantive, I'll take your point.
Since when is art supposed to solve the problems of our society? Art is never supposed the problems of our society, just bring them in the spotlight.
I feel like you don't understand the purpose of having this debate. If this debate was just going to be soft-lined into why art is bad and why art is good, there would be no reason as to why we should be having this course. That would just degrade the whole quality of the debate. We can't be having debates on why art is bad and why art is good at the end of the day. Okay, but even if it brings attention or awareness towards these certain problems, I'm going to show you why that's particularly bad in status quo. Notice there's a sort of likelihood of misinterpretation. Why is this necessarily true? I feel like team opposition, even if this art is particularly good, they create some sort of generalization of the experiences that are happening to these sorts of people. Notice it undermines the nuance in people's experience. Even if they're going through marginalization, there's a sort of nuance in which every black person is being faced by this sort of racism. Secondly, why is this necessarily true? We feel like there's a sort of ambiguity on this sort of art at the end of the day, because there's no clear-cut reason as to why we should do these things, as to why this sort of thing is bad, as to why we should get some sort of mitigation mechanism at the end of the day. This looks like you leave it out to some sort of public perception. You leave conservative people to actually perceive it in any way that they want. The problem with this is that they are much more likely to link it to stereotypes existing in status quo. That's the whole idea we get from Fahad's speech on why these stereotypes in of themselves are already generalized in status quo, and they just cement them at the end of the day. Why is this particularly bad? Firstly, on the whole idea of continuity of marginalization. Notice you give conservative people the leeway to interpret these movies, to interpret these forms of art in any way that I like, at a point in time which there is much more likelihood that they're just going to link it to stereotypes existed in status quo. This becomes bad because it degrades vulnerable people's utility, because you never attain any solvency of the significant problems being faced in status quo. The comparative again becomes simple, because even if we generalize these people's situations, at least we show you that there are some sort of viable methods of attaining solvency at the end of the day. We push mitigation mechanisms towards these people that they should actually do such that they reduce the amount of bad things that are happening to them at the end of the day. Why is this particularly better? Please don't badger. Why is this particularly better? We feel like on our way up, we cater better for the most vulnerable people in this debate because there's higher likelihood of solvency. We provide solvency methods rather than glorifying things like victimhood, rather than glorifying your accountability in these situations, that thing that they try to sideline as expression. Okay, I'll take your point before I continue.
Could you please give me an example of this outcast piece of art which actively reinforces these kinds of stereotypes? One example, please.
Again, you don't understand. We do not say that it's like showing bad things that happen to these people. We're not saying that it shows bad incentives. The optics that revolve around it is what people are much more likely to do. You don't get that sort of analysis. Like, for example, if I'm talking about something like Joker, people are much more likely to relate it to things like violence rather than actually the thing that she was trying to talk about or the creator was trying to do at the end of the day. Because these people into themselves are already conservative. You don't understand that sort of analysis. I already talked about this at the end of the day. Okay, why do we become better for the most vulnerable people in this debate? I feel like this is very simple. At a point in time which we push methods of solvency, this looks like a world whereby there's much more likelihood of attaining mitigation of things like marginalization. This becomes comparatively better because we maximize the utility of the most vulnerable people in this debate. Notice, team opposition gives us no reason as to why we should even solve the problems, but just create some sort of generalization that bad things are happening to these people. We don't think such a world is better. We don't think they can win this debate. With that, I end my speech.
Thanks, second prop. Calling second up.
Just 1 second to put my camera on.
Speaker, you're muted.
Sorry. So before I start the speech, first of all, I want to tell you that please verbal POIs, and secondly, a trigger warning for I will be touching some sensitive issues. So if you wish to leave, do so. With that in mind, I hope I'm visible, audible, and I'll start my speech in 3, 2, one panel when Aronofsky was depressed. The only reason why he made these films in the first place was because it was a cry for help, because he wanted to express himself at the end of the day. And after having so much and after having actual fans who connected and related with his art, it was the moment where he felt a little bit closer to being normal, a little bit closer to the society as a thing. And what the last year he actually admitted that he had suicidal thoughts during this, and we tell you that this is a thing that drives them further away. We want this in our society because we talk about outcasted people. With that in mind, in my speech you'll see four points of rebuttal. We'll talk about what David said on one and my own constructive point. First of all, if we have to talk about rehabilitations, we have two responses here. First of all, on effectiveness, and here we tell you that we often don't acknowledge the fact that we are mentally challenged in the first place, right? That's the reason why people who go to psychiatrists in the first place are not from their own initiative, but much more rather by other people's, right? What this means is when you're in a moment when you see, I don't know, on a bookshelf, the book on how to maintain yourself and build a happy life, we tell you that these people who are already outcasted and have a lot of problems in their lives, we tell you that they are much more likely to actually buy books who they can relate with much more rather on their side of the house. More than this is because it's much easier for us to relate to people through emotions and so on. But secondly, even if this measure is true in the first place, we tell you that we have on our side of the house as well. This is not mutually exclusive. More than this, let's make a clarification. We tell you that this is a value motion, not a policy one, right? What this means is that they don't have the fiat in the first place to just assume that that there will be less ill writers and so on. They don't have the fiat. This is not the policy motion. We are only comparing values and benefits at the end of the day. With that in mind, second point of rebuttal on romanticization, and we have two main responses here. First of all, we tell you that not, because these certain obscure art is often very sad, right? It shows, as Dostoevsky didn't write about how cool it was to be a criminal in the first place, but how sad the reality was in the first place, right? More than this, when people actually read those books in the first place, they felt connected. That's first of all. But second, even if we have to talk about extremely graphics details, we tell you that they feel better because they feel like they are a bit more normal than the average, right? They feel a bit more normal and closer to the society when they read those graphics and violence art. If they want to talk about this in the first place, it scares them away, it drives them away. More than this, third of all, we tell you on marginalization, we tell you that it is a given in our society. It is said, but it is true. It's a given in our society, the fact that we are different because we are, I don't know, having some mental issues and problems in the first place. We tell you that on both sides of the houses, we will be marginalized and pushed away from our society because we are different. But the key difference that we make on the end of the day is that we have the capability of actually making communities in the first place, right? Such as the punk community, such as the rock community in the first place, and so on, because we feel more connected. We can form we can form communities because we are all, as well marginalized. No, thank you. More than this, first of all, violence, check that now, because firstly it shows how cruel the sad reality is, but secondly we tell you that, come on, let's be serious. I watched Nightcrawler, Joker and so on. We tell you that no, it's not like you suddenly become a psychopath because of this. No, it shows you how cruel it is to be one, and it fears you away. Be right, please.
Notice expression is already symmetrical. The nuance between both sides is that we actually push for mitigation. Show me how you better the most vulnerable people in this debate.
The most vulnerable people are the artists themselves, who feel marginalized and driven further away from the society. When they write a book, when they know that they are being heard because this is a cry for help, that will be the exact same moment where they feel better, they feel more normal because they are being heard. More than this, let's us talk about what Sarah said, two main points. Firstly, he explained to you very clearly how it shows you that we are not alone on the artist point, right? We tell you that other otherwise, what they have on their side of the house is that we have marginalized people who already are sad and have a lot of mental issues. If they can't even express if they can't express themselves in the first place, that means that they'll probably become more depressed, have more anxiety issues, maybe even suicidal thoughts at the end of the day, because we want to be heard as a human being. It's a human need. More than this, second of all, on consumers. And we tell you that we can finally relate, right? But moreover, it makes us emphasize finally, right? Because we talk about art every single day of our lives, right? More than this, we tell you that we connect with the outcast if we want this at the end of the day. More than this, let us talk about my main constructive point. I'll take a POI a bit later. And firstly, let us talk about how it helps us tackle and discuss the critical problems that are given in our society, right? Because we don't have society problems because we have this outcasted art. No, we tell you that we have outcasted art because we have problem in our society, right? People who complain about, I don't know, being misheard in our society as a minority, they write about this, right? Through this obscure art, right? What this means, because it is a human need in the first place. That's the reason why we keep up journal in the first place when we are young, because we want to write, we want to express ourselves through this art. It is very much likely. More than this, especially because these are people who are already being neglected by our society, we tell you that we have come to a point where they think they are meaningless, right? Meaning that they are much more rather, if we, I don't know, maybe talk about a problem like minority space, we tell you that they are more likely to want maybe express themselves through art about it, much more rather than, I don't know, maybe filing a complaint to the government and so on, because we tell you that they do not feel important, right? And we tell you, so what? We tell you that this finally helps us tackle those problems in the first place, right? Because we tell you that after American History X was released, it was a lot of pressure put on the juridical and policeman system in the first place, because that was a sad truth at the end of the day, right? After the 4 months and 3 days movie was released in Romania, tackling a lot of issues in misogyny in the first place, we tell you that we had a lot of NGOs coming to Romania because of this, right? More than this, we tell you that, so what? If they don't have the right to express themselves through this art, we tell you that they are very likely to maybe express themselves through something even more radical, right? Such as riots, such as protests. At the end of the day, if we have to talk about, I don't know, the most extremist one, Ted Kaczynski, we tell you that he finally decided to not bomb any more people if he was being heard. That's why we have his manifesto in the first place. More than this, second point here, we tell you that moreover, it finally helps us discuss problems, right? Because in this substantive point, I already proved how the alternative is a much more dangerous one for society and individuals as well. But moreover, it finally helps us tackle and discuss these problems that we have in the first place, because these are critical things if we have to talk about outcasted people, about minorities who express themselves through these measures because they are being unheard, because they think they are meaningless at the end of the day. And we tell you that we want to be heard, and through this method we finally are, as a society, as individuals, we feel better as consumers. Please don't vote this motion.
I thank second op, calling third prop.
Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Great. So I'm going to take my POIs verbally. Kindly don't scream at me, because that will largely disorganize me. Yeah. If I don't pause and ask for POI by my 6th minute, please feel free to unmute and ask in the calmest way possible. I'll be sure to hear you because there's no noise in the background. Yeah. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, Good Will Hunting is a 1997 American drama where Will Hunting, a young janitor at MIT with a genius-level intellect, and his struggles are depicted, right? We think far away from depicting these particular janitor struggles. It goes further as exploring the themes of trauma, identity, and connection, offering insights into navigating these particular challenges. Panel, that's the side of the house that we front for. We think a side that provides a solution is what's particularly better, right? Firstly, I'm going to show you what was supposed to be I'm going to show you what was particularly supposed to be discussed in the debate, what was discussed, and then essentially why we still win up on this particular thing, right? So, panel, I think firstly, from what we get from opposition is the whole idea of, we think the major stakeholders within this particular debate is basically these particular artists because there is a problem that exists within status quo and they need to be able to express themselves. I think it's important to note that within our counterfactual, there is still an alternative for expression. That is, artists do get to express themselves. The difference is then the manner within which they express themselves. We think the problem with the opposition side of the house is that you only cite the problems that then exist within your particular side, right? There is no sort of like solvency, there's no sort of like rehabilitation in of itself. But panel, we think even to a greater extent, where they then still prove solvency on the other side of the house, I'm still going to show you why it's not particularly the best thing, right? But first, let me engage in what happened in the debate. I think from the first speeches, we have a major clash of expression, right? Opposition says that, hey, we think that it's a major human right for us to have some sort of expression and to be able to like share experience in and of itself, right? Panel, we think from their side of the house, expression is something that becomes asymmetric because notice, we tell you on our side of the house, expression still exists, it's just in a form of rehabilitative art. The way up then becomes what sort of like expression then, what sort of like solvency that expression then going to get you. We tell you expression is only important to the extent that it's able to inspire change and not reinforce suffering. We think to a larger extent where you're only depicting certain problems, you're just pushing like for further alienation narratives that exist within status quo. I think PM already does a good work to show you how white not accepted, why art informs these particular narratives, right? We think secondly, the extent where you don't only acknowledge pain, but you also inspire a way forward. I think that's the extent within which you're able to like push for expression, right? But I think the second argument that we get from them in the first half of the day that, we think that you're able to have some sort of empathy and then we're going to like inspire some sort of sharing and like collective like joining of community, right? Two key responses to this. First, there is no mechanization as to why, as when my pain is depicted, I'm more likely going to essentially go out and continuously share, right? But then secondly, there's no active like incentive for this particular people to feel empathy, right? But even when we take them at their best, right? Empathy only becomes important when it enforces action and not stagnatization in like form of like societal engagement, right? But panel, I think then what we also get from them is that some idea of like solvency, right? They say that, we think that we achieve solvency because the art is relevant because of like they say that they achieve solvency because they get some sort of like relevance for this particular art because like something like extreme essentially happens, right? We tell you that to the extent where they get that particular sort of solvency, it's not good. The way up here is simple. On our side of the house, the comparative then like is constructed in a way that incentivizes policy because notice you're not only depicting the art, but you're also showing some sort of like societal rehabilitation in that you're pushing for a way forward. We think then the way up becomes of the magnitude of solvency that you essentially get. We tell you their side of the house like pushes for something extreme to happen in and of itself to get some sort of solvency because it's limited to expression. We tell you this expression comes with a policy incentivizing to the extent where you're able to provide for a solution for the things that then happen in this particular debate. We think they can't take this particular argument, right? But then secondly, on the whole idea of like complacency, notice there is little to no engagement on this particular argument. And I think it's very important to the extent that art gets able to shift like optics to victimhood. But then secondly, the idea that you get to commercialize art, that is the people within status quo then only view it as some sort of like source of money in and of itself, and you're less likely to have people buy into this particular thing. We think that at their best, they do get awareness. We think to the extent that this awareness is perpetuated in a way of only getting commercial benefits from it, you then don't get to benefit the artists that they say are their best stakeholders. Before I go into the clashes, I'll take you.
Do you really think writers like Dostoevsky and Osamu Dazai made outcast art just to get a commercial benefit?
Pano, notice, we say that even if the artist does have good extension, the good intentions, the nature of society or the nature within society within which they have is that they then get to commercialize like the suffering of people. Because in as much as the artist is expressing their own pain, we think it's also likely for the artist to be like depicting stories that exist within the status quo, your nearby society. That's why you go up and paint certain things. We think that's why someone wrote a script of Joker, because there's a nearby sort of like perpetual harm within society, things like mental health, to the extent that an artist doesn't only get to depict his pain, but also goes as far as depicting the pain of others. We think that then you get to commercialize the suffering of people. We think a key example is the whole idea of the Joker, right? It focused on sales of the movie and not on solvency. We think art exists in a capitalistic world. I think that's why the PM's framing becomes very important, because of the nature of this. Commercialization is more important. It becomes a bigger push for the society. We think it becomes inherently detrimental, right? So the three quick caches I'm going to weigh in this particular debate. One, on the whole idea that this particular art then becomes like, it provides like net harm, right? We think one, it provides net harm to the marginalized. Why? We think one, because society, we think we have to look at this in two ways. One, do these particular victims themselves like get like, do they get some sort of solvency? Do they get further deep do they get further marginalized, or they have hope for like that they can get out of an oppressive system? We tell you, to the extent that people, consumers within society, see this particular sort of art without some sort of like push for incentivizing over like a policy change, they get further victimized. They don't have hope for a future. We think then it's inherently harmful, because you're more likely to buy into an idol like of victimhood, right? We think that's why things like self-harm in and of itself, things like victimhood in and of itself, are further perpetuated in society. We think it becomes like problematic. But then two, on the nature of society, I think we're saying, Fahad does a very good job of showing why essentially you need some sort of cohesion within society, and how art pushes those particular narratives. To the extent where you foster policies or narratives of alienation, we think then you further disintegrate society. We think that becomes problematic. And lastly, to the artists, if we do buy into opposition's arguments, or that, we think these particular artists then get to express themselves and they want to some sort of like have an outlet for their pain, right? We think it becomes perpetually harmful to them, to the extent where you then get to commercialize on their pain. We think movies go beyond the art, like we go beyond like the artists, but more on the projects and its implementers, right? We think to the extent where you then create your art as a form of expression, but then you live in a capitalistic world, it becomes inherently detrimental to you. We think then it becomes a very big issue, right? And then lastly, on the whole idea of solvency, right? I think N2 gives you a very good characterization, and I'm going to show you, right? He says that, with the way with this particular art happens, we're going to describe societal problems to show you why that's perpetually detrimental for these particular people. You don't get any sort of solvency problems that exist on that side of the house. You don't get any sort of discourse. I rest my case.
I thank Prop 3 inviting Op 3.
Just a second to get everything done. Okay, so POIs verbally, please. He, him pronouns if you wish. And I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, Proposition's case today has a main strategic problem. They treat this debate as if it were a policy motion. But this is not a policy motion. You don't need to provide us with a counterfactual. The entire purpose of this debate is to talk about art, is to talk about the value of art. In Proposition's entire case, they chose not to focus on this and rather provide us with some kind of intangible benefits to the population. And we have a very short response to this. Rehabilitative art and outcast art are not mutually exclusive. You can have both. In the status quo, we can have both. This is not a dichotomy in which you have to choose between one and the other. You can have any type of art that you wish. The debate is whether or not outcast art is valuable. You don't need to prove that it is more valuable than other kinds of art. This is not what the motion is about. And again, we tell you that outcast art oftentimes has elements of rehabilitation. Crime and Punishment is outcast art which has elements of rehabilitation. Movies like Drive or Taxi Driver are proof that this is not a dichotomy. You can have both. You do not need to choose. It is not a motion where you need to put your resources into one thing and deprioritize a certain thing. No, this is a motion about art, and you don't have a fiat to change the artist. And they tell us that artists still have the means of expressions and consumers still are happy. But their counterfactual literally proposes to change the entire artist, because art is only the product of the artist. If you want to change art, or if you want to have more of one type of art and less of the other type of art, then you literally need to change the artist who make it. And as you don't have this kind of fiat in this debate, we see that the counterfactual is completely baseless. And also, they have this huge point of commercialization and how this is a problem with art. And this is again another strategic mistake, because the commercialization of art is a problem of society and not of art itself. Today, we are talking about the intrinsic value of art, not about commercialization, which is how society treats art. We are not talking about this, but rather about art itself. So it does not matter that art is commercialized in one way or another in this debate. What matters is in this debate is whether or not that art is harmful or has value or not. And in this debate, they use this word that you as the consumer are influenced by the art. And somehow the artist wants you to feel certain things, or that capitalism for some reason wants you to feel certain things. But art is not made for this. Art is made for the artist to express himself. Oftentimes the artist doesn't even really care about your review. Franz Kafka didn't even want to be published. He just wanted to express himself. This is not a motion where the artist is evil and somehow wants to hurt the consumer. This is completely baseless. And now they say that it is not good to consume this type of content, which constantly reinforces certain ideas and which somehow constantly proposes that this kind of rejection in outcast is a good thing. And first of all, we tell you that outcast art does not support outcast. Outcast art is literally a cry for help from people suffering and who want to tell others how they feel. Movies like American Psycho or Fight Club teach you about the dangers of violence. They are outcast art which explicitly tell you how bad it is to be an outcast. They do not romanticize it. They do not propose it or get behind it. They just exist. And also, they say that it is not a very good idea to consume a high quantity of this art, because somehow you'll become depressed about it. And first of all, we tell you that art in itself cannot affect you that much to get you depressed or to get you anxiety. You are depressed or you have anxiety because of societal problems, because of trauma, because of your genes and other kinds of these things. Art in itself cannot make you an outcast. The reason why usually outcasts consume this art is not because the art made them outcasts, but rather that outcasts want outcast art. This means that art in itself cannot break you. Art in itself cannot make you an outcast. You are an outcast and you consume outcast art because you were already an outcast, not because outcast art made you what you are today. So again, we're seeing that this point of how you're affecting the consumer and how the consumer will now be depressed is completely unfounded, because one piece of media which literally lasts 2 hours or just one song cannot break the psyche of a person. And they also, let's assume that somehow it can, but it's still a good thing for these people to consume this art. Why? Well, let's look at how rejection and outcasts work in their society. They are lonely. They feel misunderstood. The main point of their premise of being outcasts is that nobody is like them. This is their main point. What happens when they consume outcast art? They see that other people are like them. They see that other people share their same feelings. There other people are outcasts as well. And so, given that they see that other people are like them as well, they stop feeling like outcasts, because you're an outcast only when you think that you're lonely. But the more of this outcast art you consume, the more you will see that you are not lonely. The more you will see that other people are like you. So the entire premise of you being an outcast is hurt by the fact that you see that other people are outcasts like you, and this is done by consuming outcast art. So we see that outcast art in the end does have a net benefit on your psyche. We don't assume that this is a huge benefit, because again, it cannot modify your entire life, but at least it will feel you like you are somewhat less of an outcast. Now, if there's any POI? No POI, great. Now, also, as I've said, and my colleague said, this art does generate dialogue in society. Fight Club did generate dialogues about toxic masculinity and at the same time about the exclusion of men in society, and this is a great thing. The counterfactual they propose is a sort of world where you only need to solve problems and all these kinds of things are solvable, and if you just snap your fingers, everything will go away. But no, we need the harsh truth. We need to see the blood and the sweat of the people suffering. And this is only done through outcast art. Only outcast art can be the one which can actually generate dialogue in the problems in society. Note that we do not say that automatically these problems will be solved, because again, the point of art is not to solve problems in society. This is not what art is supposed to be. If we can get the impact that it generates valuable discussions in this debate, we win this debate. And this is what we did today. So we win this debate. And finally, on the point of victimhood, what they propose is a sort of art where a sort of art which constantly tells you that you need to change, which constantly tells you that you are in a bad place right now and you need to change your life in order to be a normal person. And if someone comes at you and tells you that you need to change, you automatically assume that that person does not understand you, because if you were to understand them, you will not then tell them to change. If people come at you and they tell you that you need to change, the people will assume that you are broken, and you will feel like the people do not understand you, because they do not understand you because they think that you are broken. And so if you just go to people and tell them, no, this is not how you're supposed to be, you're supposed to be in another different way, they will feel even more rejected because they are not understood. They will feel even more as outcasts because people constantly tell them to change. So again, we're seeing that this feeling of victimhood is actually more propagated on their side of the house than ours, because outcasts are its main component is the fact that it understands these people, is the only medium by which these people actually feel understood. It is the only medium by which these people can get rid of their loneliness. If you have an art which tells you that it is not okay to be lonely, of course you will think that you are not understood, and so you will feel even more lonely. So this is why today, panel, I am incredibly proud to oppose.
I thank the op whip, and I now call the op reply.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, one second. Until I start, congrats everyone for the debate. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Going back to the question I asked myself at the beginning of my Op 1 speech, how much truth can we stand? Should we, I don't know, express these values through outcast art or suppress them and try to have a more joyful experience in these people's lives? Why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because this is what the debate should have been about. The debate should have been about comparing values, right? Comparing the negatives and positives of outcast art with the negatives and positives of a viable alternative. I'm telling you that in my reply speech, I'll have 2 main points. Firstly, on strategy, and second, I'll analyze the clashes. Firstly, on strategy. They did not compare values, so I'd say that they did not particularly play the same motion as us. That's why the debate was kind of symmetrical. In our opinion, we targeted more the specific interest of the agents in the motion with specific solutions on how to do that. Therefore, I think on the simple point of, on the simple idea of, I don't know, WSDC format when it comes to this motion, we won. The second point of strategy, well, what do they need to prove in order to win? What should have they proved in order to win? We're telling you that they have three paths to victory. First, prove that there is a harm in society, right? That there, I don't know, violence, whatever, people who are isolated, marginalized communities, prove a harm. Second, prove that there is a causation of a harm. On this motion specifically, they should have proved that specifically Outcast Art is causing this harm. Well, what they said is that this creates a specific perpetuation of isolation and stuff like this, but we rebutted this point and told you that on the other hand, on their side, on our side, we have a much more inclusive solution where people can find and build communities, but I'll get more into this in my clashes part. Moreover, they needed to prove a clear and unique alternative to the status quo, right? And they tried to propose an alternative, but we're telling you that that alternative was, first of all, not unique, and second of all, they did not prove why their alternative is better, because they did not compare the, the specific values of alternatives. Now onto clashes, and the first clash is the role of art. And we're telling you that in our view, the role of art is not to fix people. It is not to rehabilitate people and constantly tell them that their life is wrong, their structure, the way they're structured their lives is wrong. We're telling you that in our view, art is a form of expression, right? And we should be able to express anything, obviously, within legal measures. And we're telling you that what should we do about it? Because this is a question that remain unanswered from the prop side. If you do not like this, if you oppose this, what should we do about it? Because we are not machines. We should not avoid this. And that's what we've proved to you over this debate. We proved to you that we should embrace these negative emotions, as these are the only way we can cope with the actual problems we have in society, right? Moreover, on the social impact, and I think this was the most important clash in the debate, firstly, on social division. And we're telling you that they proved that social division exists. Problem is that neither side will fix social division, right? Even if in their base case, where their counterfactual works, where social divisions will still exist, right? Why do we have advantages? Because we bring it into the light. If we do not have Outcast Art that talks about specific problems and harms that happen in society, be them challenging, be them unpleasant, be them whatever, we do not bring them into light. We're telling you that movies like American Psycho brought into light the problems with Western culture and capitalist ideology. We're telling you that we bring them into light and we spark discussion. Moreover, that we create communities. Art is a great conversation starter. We always talk about art, and we see, I don't know, the punk community, the grunge community that connected with each other. We prove to you that it is a response to a problem, not a cause. So therefore, we win this debate. I rest my case.
Attack the op reply, calling prop reply.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Please go ahead.
Okay. My speech begins in 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, the judging rubric for art motions considers the intent of the art, its value, and the impact. This is what the debate seeks to solve or address, hence the metric that we run within proposition. Within OP, you can't just argue that art has no impact because there is no value to the constructive matter that OP tries to achieve anyways. They say art can't make you an outcast, yet they go ahead to argue that these types of people exist in a society and they need shared expression. The problem is there's no value out of the shared the shared oppression, hence the debate inherently becomes parallel on engagement. They never directly engage the case we bring within proposition. But then I just want to take them at their best, right? Let's say we were never supposed to run a counterfactual. Let's say you just have to oppose something and don't tell us what to support looks like within most cases. Firstly, on strategy. They lose this debate because we tell you the context in which the debate happens. Notice, from PM, we are able to characterize the world in which this outcast art exists. I tell you two things, is that A, within this world, you are a minority. But then secondly, I tell you, within this world, people that marginalize you prey on continuously seeing you suffer with no solution. I give an example of a patriarchal society where they want to continue seeing women as minorities. The impact that then had is that they had to prove to the extent to which those things do not happen within their side of the house. I think that is enough to win us the debate, even with no counterfactual whatsoever. But then two, the impact this context had within this debate is that we showed you what you in most cases create as out of their so-called shared oppression is commercialization of the problems these individuals face, because they don't care about solving your problems, but they just enjoy seeing those things because it is what they believe in within most cases. Even with no counterfactual, I think that is enough for us to oppose outcast art in all its forms. What do they run? Let's take them at their best, right? A, they talk about gaining shared experiences. Notice, from their side of the house, they say that art is not supposed to give us any impact. I don't know why then they have the audacity to run things like shared experiences. But then even so, I think we also show you within our side of the house, without the existence of outcast art, you're still able to have the shared experiences. What this looks like within our side of the house is the portrayal of solutions to the problems these marginalized communities face within most cases. What that essentially means, the value of shared experiences is more within our side of the house. Notice within that side of the house, it's just shared oppression. We just victimize ourselves. We continue being, victims within a failed system. What happens within our side, shared experiences that incite things like change, that speak to things like solvency, we oppose outcast art. Secondly, they come and tell us that, art doesn't exist to solve problems. The same team comes and tells us that you need this expression to solve your problems. I don't get what exactly they were running within that regard. Thirdly, they say that you can have both sort of like rehabilitative art or constructive art and outcast art. Notice that then essentially means they do acknowledge the problems that exist within outcast art and do acknowledge the fact that these problems can inherently be worsened without the existence of things like rehabilitative art. But then thirdly, they come and tell us that this debate cares only about the intrinsic value. Notice, within my setup, I tell you why art exists in the first place, how it is able to influence things like shaping narratives. What that essentially means, the intrinsic value looks like the perception you create around the marginalized communities. The intrinsic value looks like the sort of domination or the sort of like continuous suffering of these marginalized communities. They can't win this debate. We win this debate because A, we show you it is not necessary for you to continue painting these people as oppressive. We show you it's not necessary for you to continue painting society as unchangeable. We tell you it is important for you to create a society where we believe we can change, not a society where we continue victimizing ourselves, not a society where we give people a chance to prey onto our suffering, not a society where we continue seeing ourselves suffering and we can't do anything about it. There is no way you can vote opposition within this debate. They don't engage on the whole idea of like complacency of art. They don't engage on the whole idea of that misinterpretation. They can never win this debate.
I thank the speakers for that very fine speech. Consecutively thank both teams for what was a very, very wonderful round. Virtual crossovers / handshakes are appreciated all across